25 of the Orchestra podcast. We are here with my good friend, Michael Clark, who is a pianist and piano teacher. And he is here to tell us about how he built the Music Lab, a business in South Tacoma that he runs now. Say hi, Michael.
Hi.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now before we start a conversation of how you got to where you are.
Sure. So just like personal background, like
Sure.
okay. Well, I'm a pianist, as you said. I also dabble in composition. You and I, obviously, you know this, went to college together. So for those listening, that's PLU. I studied piano there with Dr. Jane Hardy. I studied with a local piano teacher in Lakewood as a kid. I sort of knew I wanted to do something vaguely with music in my career later in life, but I didn't really have a concept for what that would look like specifically. I thought for a while it would be film score. Which is still actually kind of a little bit of a dream I cherish and I dabble in sometimes, but ended up going the education route, although a different education route than is currently commonly known.
Well, and most places don't really offer an education degree in piano. You pick, elementary orchestra, band, choir. There's no piano performance with an emphasis in education. That kind of thing is if it does exist, it's got to be extremely rare.
Yeah, and you just kind of got to hobble it together. If that's your intent, you have to kind of hobble it yourself. Like you get your piano performance degree, and then you make sure you take piano pedagogy and piano lit, piano literature. But even those, you would think that those would be required for piano performance majors, but it's not always the case. And the pool of people who want to take courses like that is pretty small, I think. So surprisingly, when I was at PLU, when we were at PLU, what year did you graduate?
I started my student teaching in 2015.
Oh yeah, okay. So I was ahead of you because I graduated 2013. I always forget. I don't think piano ped was even offered at any point that I was there.
Really?
So anyway, just to your point, you kind of, it doesn't really exist. You kind of have to hobble it together. But back in college, I didn't actually have plans to teach at all. So I got a degree I got a BMA, and then I can't remember their definitions and distinctions. But I got a music degree with an emphasis in piano. Played so much piano, chamber music, piano ensemble, blah, blah, blah. But I also got a major in sociology. And I actually thought that I was going to go get a PhD in sociology and be in academia. And that, for various reasons, just didn't really pan out. And I'm so glad, actually, for also various reasons. And so, let's see, you asked me just about my personal background. Yeah, I mean, I guess, there's not much to say. Bottom line, music has been a gigantic part of my life. Like it's just like always been there, like in the background. And I sort of, go ahead.
Even I would ardently argue that there's no way I'm going to be a teacher because everybody in my family is a teacher.
Oh, really?
Level. Oh yeah. I mean, if they're a teacher or farmer, the two choices.
What a distinction.
And I was so sure that I wouldn't do that just because I'm very much a contrarian.
Yeah.
I was thinking about going into industrial design.
Oh, interesting. I love friends who do that.
Well, yeah, because I really think the combination of drafting and coming up with things that don't already exist.
Yeah.
But in some ways, music fills both of those psychological needs, especially once you get into composition. Definitely. I've been having a couple of conversations with people that do film scoring that you brought up earlier, and I would love to get into that, but it's not typically done with Western notation. It's always because they're sending you video files that you could look at if you're using something like Final Cut Pro or a digital artist workspace.
Mm-hmm.
And then you like just beep boop bot put in like the digital all these little squares, and
it's just all with Cubase or Audacity.
And you need like a million plugins to change. You can do some really cool things.
It's complicated. It is.
And I used to think the people who went to the Berkeley with 2 E's, not the one with a Y that I wanted to go to when I was still thinking about engineering, that get a degree just to use Pro Tools. I'm like, oh, what a joke. But no. You need that degree. Is definitely worth it.
Audio engineering it's intense. It's like so you may know this, but and like kind of dovetailing off of what you're saying about industrial design as well, is that I write the music for a podcast that comes out every year about designers in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's called This Is Design School. It's another PLU alum and a professor are kind of spearheading that. But anyway, I write the music, and I got Cubase, which is another DAW for DAW. I never really know.
Well, every time somebody says DAW, I think of DOS, which is like, computer, like your operating system. It's so confusing.
I know. So, and what I found is that learning how to use Cubase was like learning how to play a different instrument. It was nuts.
It is.
Like, and when I listen back to my first seasons on that show, I'm like, oh my God. But I was just like trying to get it done every week, like, because it's like Photoshop on drugs. It is so complicated. So yeah. And like when you see people like Hans Zimmer working in the studio or working, it is always on those programs. And Hans Zimmer actually uses Cubase. I don't know. I mean, I guess probably Final Product. They use Western notation for the orchestral recordings.
But usually the DAW creates that, and you just. For sure. But definitely one of the hardest parts of being a composer is making really nice looking parts.
Yeah.
That's almost just as much work as making the music itself.
Yeah. And they've got these I mean, I don't want to get too far off topic, but they've got these amazing virtual instruments now. So like,
oh yeah, though they just rolled out that new one for Sibelius that just like blows your socks off.
Yeah, so like for Cubase, I have with Joshua Bell violin, and it's just they've gone through and meticulously sampled Joshua Bell playing some super old expensive violin, with all these articulations and like the top mics in the world, and it sounds amazing. It sounds like a real violin player, like, which is awesome and also a little bit sad and scary. So
yeah, well, the saving grace there is that the nuance is possible with those digital softwares, but it's still so impossible. It's hard. Unless you actually are a violinist at that level, you don't really know idiomatically what.
Yeah, totally. How to create those nuances.
Yeah, exactly. Or like where you would do like a kind of a slidey sound because there's a shift there. Exactly. You wouldn't know that if you're not like Joshua Bell. Yeah, and where Joshua Bell would put a slidey shift is not where Hilary Hahn would put. Right. Well, Hilary Hahn doesn't slide ever. She's just perfect somehow. So anyhow, I was wrapping up my education degree. You had started teaching out of Urban Grace at some point in there.
Yeah, so I graduated in 2013, and then I went to Europe for a year with my good friend, and we farmed, and it was insane. And then I came back, and I was still my plan all along was to do this like grand European farming adventure, and then come back, and then go to grad school for sociology. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in there, I was like, I don't know if I want to be in the academy. I don't know if I want to spend my whole life playing the busy Olympics and I've got lots of friends who are professors, and my sister-in-law she just defended her dissertation, and it just doesn't sound like somewhere I wanted to be at that point. So I started teaching. Actually, I had never intentionally thought, oh, I'm going to be a piano teacher. Um, one of my good friends had always wanted to learn how to play the piano, and I suspect this is how it starts for a lot of people, honestly. Had always wanted to learn how to play the piano, but she's very shy and very,
Mm-hmm.
very nervous and introverted, and she wanted to do it with the right teacher in her mind.
Well,
So
because ubiquitously, piano teachers are known for being like jerks.
I know
Right?
it's horrible. It's horrible how much psychological trauma I undo in my
Well,
studio.
and even people that I like highly respect that are piano teachers or piano players, when I have asked, because like for violin, viola, cello, bass, like there's a really clear, well-established pedagogy
Oh yeah, we talked about
of
this. Yeah.
etude books. Like you play this one, then you play that one, then you play that one, then you play that one, and solo repertoire. And obviously, there's choices. It's not just like one route.
Yeah.
But like if you want to learn violin, and it doesn't, I don't know who your teacher's going to be. I can give you like 3 years worth of books
Sure.
that any teacher is going to use.
In a nice
No matter which teacher you use, they're going to use some combination of these books.
Right.
And when I've reached out to piano experts that I, respect and get along with, that, they're not jerks in reality, but they just, oh, you have to get a teacher.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Oh, you have to get a teacher. Well, I mean, there's the Bartok microcosmos. Can you just like tell me which numbers are the most useful to you?
Yeah.
Like, no, get a teacher.
I've taught out of those actually, and kids surprisingly really like them.
Well,
makes sense, but
they're great. I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist, but I feel like this goes all the way back to like the Depression era of women getting jobs to support the family.
Could be right. Like protect the secret.
That they never made this available pedagogy to protect the profession of piano teachers.
Possibly. I mean, my knowledge of like violin and really most instruments that are not piano is fairly scarce, so I can't say for certain, but I do know that in the piano world there are like 5 bajillion different schools of piano playing and teaching. There's the German school and the French school and the Russian school, and sort of like nobody in the field even seems to be able to define what any of that really even means. Like when you really just ask somebody, like say you ask somebody with a PhD, like, or a DMA, you'd be like, what is the Russian school of piano playing? They'll just say something like, oh, it's about big thrust chords, and it's so they'll give like a style. Mm-hmm. They'll just describe the way that music from that school sounds, rather than giving you some sort of specific reason as to why it's worthy of an entirely different category name approach to learning. So I think that there is, within the field, there's just like lots of ambiguity as it is. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I think you're right. Piano, I myself, I think I've tried to, you and I have spoken a little bit about it, but there's just such a vast sea of materials and so many different ways to go that it does get a little bit mushy and vague.
Well, the most helpful resource that I have found are the Hanon exercises, I mean, for obvious reasons. But even then, you kind of need a teacher to help you decide which one you need.
Yeah.
And if any composers out there who want to, accept the challenge, is that what's good about Hanon is that it's melodious. Mm-hmm. And like all of the violin etude books, they're like 98% of the piano like exercise repertoire that I look up is like very technical and not like you're using all 10 fingers and you're doing these like diminished triad things that have no musical context other than like building strength and flexibility and familiarity with the keyboard, which I guess from a DMA's perspective looks like the most important thing. But at any level on any instrument, a student needs to love their sound.
Totes.
Because you're going to quit if you're not making noises that you love.
Yeah, right.
And which is why piano teachers have this reputation of being you know, mean or rude or not any fun. They're trying to, you know, give you good technique and teach you the way that they were taught, more or less. But it hasn't been reinvented.
No, it's true. It's true.
Like, ever.
And it's bizarre because there are a lot of, like, my mind is like bursting with things to tell you to look at for you personally in your own practice. But the problem with piano literature is that the good stuff already assumes a fairly high bar.
Exactly.
Like, so one of my favorite things to give students and even to play myself are the Muskowski petite etudes. He wrote these 20 little piano etudes that are just like marvelous, but like you can't even begin to play them if you you need like 4 years before you can play them. They're really, really devilish.
Well, as I have looked at my own keyboard journey, and as I looked around the room in piano lab, or the whatever they call it, the class at PLU, is there's this assumption that it's easier to learn hands separately. But then when I took lessons with Paul Tegels on organ lessons, it was, I mean, he demanded that no matter how slowly you had to play or how easy the piece, hands together all the time and never roll a chord.
Interesting.
Because the biggest barrier that you're breaking when you're learning a keyboard instrument is making your brain combine the, you know, left and right hemispheres seamlessly.
I think what's going on. Sorry, go ahead.
There's so many times. I mean, as a piano teacher, I'm sure you listen to a student practice something with one hand, and they put hands together, and it's like they've never practiced. It's like all of that practice time with one hand was lost.
It's a totally different. Neural pathway. It's a totally different activity, right? So then playing one hand separately. You're absolutely right. I think what's going on there is, like, what I found in my experience is that the best thing to do is to reduce the number of variables and to reduce the cognitive load on the student. So, like, one way of doing that, it may not be the best way. I mean, that's a really interesting point you make. It may not be the best way is having them play hands separate, because then it's only the one line they have to read, the one hand they have to coordinate. But playing extremely slowly, hands together, accomplishes the same thing, as long as you go extremely slow.
And making sure that there's repertoire in front of them where they can be successful doing that.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of people may not know there's these preludes for manual without pedal by Flemish composer Jacques Lemons that I worked on when I was starting on organ. And I still use those from time to time, because there's, you know, even more that I haven't even looked at yet. That's the same kind of thing where there's not even really any chords going on per se. It's just, you know, melody and harmony. Very simple. But to build up that reading both lines and using both hands, and making it melodic, and also just working on one technique at a time. Like, why isn't there a piano book where the first lesson is just, you know, there are a lot of books that have hands together and then pentascales where your hands don't move. I mean, there's a million of those.
For sure.
But then there's this huge divide between that and whatever's after it.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right. So, and to all this, to your point, I am constantly telling. So I'm actually writing a method book to address, like, this exact. I'm going to self-publish it on Amazon and see how it does. But, like, it is so bizarre to me how the piano, especially the beginner piano field, has not changed since, like, Edna Mae Burnham in 1951 with her friggin' stick figures. Like, it's really weird. And, like, so the reason I decided to write a method book actually is because I personally was just like, what is this? Why am I playing Yankee Doodle on 5 black keys with this 36-year-old man who is so embarrassed right now?
Well, and that's something that, as I've watched your progression, that I've appreciated from a pedagogic standpoint is I see you making music for your students all the time.
All the time.
And if you could just like talk to us a little bit about why that's important and how you make a decision about what kind of piece to make for a student.
Well, I think that there's a lot that goes into that decision-making process. A lot of it is intuitive, based on your knowledge of the student, but a lot of it is analytical. It's like, what problem are they struggling with? So it's kind of, it's very much like writing little etudes. I hesitate to use that word because it implies a sort of seriousness, but like for example, I've got one student who just like for the love of her, she could not figure out staccato, which is like strange because that's like the easiest thing to do,
press and release.
It was like really hard for her, so I wrote this piece that was all staccato, and and so somebody might, I've spoken to other piano teachers who are like, well, that probably just takes so much time and what a waste of time, and I really would argue against that because I was able to write a song that she likes that sounds closer to sort of like 20th century film score that is like appealing, that she would want to practice,
Well, something that I heard once from at a choral workshop was that if you always adding more steps to the learning process and breaking it down further, every step you add takes away from the amount of time that it takes for them to master that skill. So even though it may be more time for you as a teacher,
sure,
there's more connective tissue for the student.
Right.
Like we were talking about from pentascale pieces to the Schumann album for the young is just like this giant divide with are you going to jump across? You're going to build a bridge? You're going to fly?
Yeah.
So every time you are putting in the energy to make something new, you're helping to build a bridge across that divide.
Sure.
So it's never a waste of time.
Really good way to put that. And like another thing is like I flat out just disagree with the way almost every method book I've ever seen teaches the piano. Like, and not for the sake of just being some like uppity young piano teacher like who would challenge the legacy or whatever, but like I don't know, like I think the best way I think we could probably agree the best way to organize a method is with patterns of some kind, so that you can like latch onto patterns, right? As a way of progressing through increasingly difficult technical demands. But the way that these method books do that is so silly to me. They go by the circle of fifths. So like which makes sense if you're a DMA, but if you're like 7 years old,
exactly,
like why on earth are you going to understand the logic between going from my C5 finger position to my G5 finger position?
Well, and this is something when I recently interviewed Sven Ronning, who a mutual colleague, friend of both of us. And he very much has long ago broken away from the standard violin teaching approach.
Interesting.
And I have always appreciated that he meets each student kind of where they are and kind of tailors an approach for them that I had not experienced with other teachers and other violin professors that I had lessons with when I was looking at colleges.
Right.
Back up my memory for a second here. Where were we going?
Well, we were just talking about
hating method books.
Yeah, and patterns, and how I disagree with. I don't even teach out of a method book anymore. I did for about a year, and then I was like, "This is trash. I don't think we should be introducing 1-5-7-1."
So we were talking about experts versus expert teachers.
Sure.
So everybody wanted to go and study with this violinist Dorothy DeLay back, way back when, and she was, a student of Ivan Galamian, who was, one of the, primary violin pedagogues of the great violinist of the 20th century, and so many of those great teachers are natural players. They naturally play well. And so if you are thinking about writing a method book from the perspective of a DMA who could play any of the Rachmaninoff preludes from memory in under a week,
right,
then you don't really understand the struggle. You don't understand what a student doesn't understand.
exactly
And
right.
so Sven was talking about the benefits of not being that, savant level musician and then being a teacher, is that you have yourself experienced that struggle of not understanding this skill.
Right.
And so you will be more apt to teach someone else
Right.
how to overcome that barrier.
Yeah, 100%. You can adopt the perspective of somebody who has no idea what's happening. I took guitar lessons for a bit,
Mhm.
and just to kind of remind myself what it's like to not know anything when you're, and it was
Oh,
hard.
that's fun.
Like, it was tough, and honestly, I knew something, right? Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't even a true beginner. Like, I had music theory, and I could understand the way that the fretboard was laid out. But like, uh, anyway, yes, I think it is. I think that is very, very astute of Sven.
So you are more or less applying this theory that we're talking about with students, and you're teaching privately out of that beautiful space at Urban Grace in Tacoma.
Yeah.
So how do you get from there to the music lab?
So that is an interesting question, and it kind of happened quickly, honestly. It was like I was going along, teaching. My studio was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I was kind of discovering all of these theories that we were just speaking about, these ideas. How do you teach? What is the process of learning? Like, what do students really need from a teacher? All that sort of thing. And I was just kind of building my style and my approach to teaching. And at the same time, my studio was growing, and mostly through word of mouth. And a friend of mine, Caitlin, why can't I think of her name? Caitlin Turner,
Mhm.
the cellist.
Yeah.
She and I got connected through Jane's chamber camps, and so we're in a trio.
Mhm.
And she and I, one year at one of those camps, just kind of geeked out and started talking about the possibilities of sort of like opening a joint studio, um, and maybe what that would look like, because it was a sort of like, this could be more than the sum of its parts thing. Like, we could have a piano studio and a cello studio, but then think of the opportunities for like chamber music, like, and passing students back and forth to work on, this cello sonata, um, or just duets, or so one time, for example, I had a student, and I arranged Jingle Bells, like, super easy for piano and cello, so that her student, who was a beginner, and my student, who's a beginner, could work on ensemble playing within their like realm,
Mhm.
um, so just opportunities like that became very appealing to me. And I was like, so much of my experience of a musician is, and this is kind of interesting, honestly, coming from a pianist, but like, my favorite parts about being a musician are always the social parts. So like, I love chamber music. I love playing in groups, and I think that, and then I'm going somewhere with this. I think that uh, so much of what makes being a musician a blast is like completely inaccessible to 99% of people that just want to take lessons.
Oh my gosh, like because of where we were at the right time, you and I got to play the Shaker melody from Appalachian Spring in La Madeleine
Yeah,
in Paris.
right.
I mean, how many of the percentage of the entire world will have that? And Jeff Bell Hansen had to tell them that it was a Shaker spiritual song to get them to allow us to play that
Yeah.
in La Madeleine, because they wanted us to play spiritual music only. I mean, but the Sasson and Faré were both the organist in that church that was previously built as a monument to Napoleon's victories.
Yeah, just incredible, right?
I mean, who gets to have that kind of experience?
And even like, so that and then, but like, even more ground level, like when you take piano lessons as like a 7-year-old, I hope this does not come off as elitist, everybody. I'm not elitist, but like, usually, at least in my experience, this is my teacher, it's sort of like a Mrs. Smith down the street scenario. Like, maybe like the church pianist gives lessons on the side, and it's just very kind of low key and often, not always, often kind of low bar. And what I was like, well, what if we could find a way to bring a university experience or approximate that for somebody who wants to pay for it privately and doesn't need to like spend like 15 years learning their instrument and then pay like $80,000 or some obscene amount to go to a liberal arts university, and then they'll get to play 2 piano music. And then, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just piano, but it's if everybody ubiquitously is kind of charging more or less the same price for lessons, because I mean, you really you can't charge too much, or people will just run away.
They balk, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're, Miss Smith down the street, just teaching lessons on the side, and maybe you're a grade school teacher, or you've got a day job, but then you just a couple times a week, but you're looking to expand your studio. If you're providing, I mean, maybe mediocre, you could say, but I would instead just say like a uninformed approach.
Sure.
You're just, you show up, we work on something together.
Yeah, maybe more spontaneous.
The studio isn't necessarily going to like grow and blossom, and that student's only going to get better if like they within themselves have the fortitude to achieve that.
Right.
In a situation where for the same price you're devoting all of your time to making it accessible for every student, and with the goal that each of those students will have available to them any musical experience that they so desire.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you're going to attract more students, and without, charging through the roof.
Yeah, exactly.
You're giving them a better experience for the same private lesson fee, format. Yeah.
And it's about creating a framework. It's about creating like an ecosystem where things are happening that people can participate in or not. So like I don't even, and this is all, this is all very gradual, that I made these decisions and slowly kind of discovered this model that I like so much, but I don't even charge per lesson anymore. I don't, and we don't do makeup lessons.
We talked about this years and years ago.
Yeah. So it's just a flat membership fee. I literally tell people every time they ask, we run it sort of like a gym. So like if you pay this amount, you just get access to us. And that works really well because honestly, I don't know what this says about me, but I don't think I would do this if I had to micromanage payments. Like
exactly.
So many piano teachers I know, like I get texts from my piano teaching colleagues and they're like, can you tell me if this text is too aggressive? Because this woman hasn't paid me for March yet. And I'm like, dude, you need to get like Stripe and do this all via card on the 2nd of the month. Like I would never, ever spend that much time. What I always tell parents when they're like, well, you don't charge by the lesson, like Mrs. Smith down the street charges by, I always say, well, like this allows me to have so much time and energy to like build the kind of program that your student is going to really benefit from.
I mean, when people look at my private lesson contract, it reads like you're buying a house. I mean, like but you, as a private teacher, you have to protect yourself and also have some assurance that your income is going to be consistent.
Right.
Especially if you're living off of it.
Right, exactly, 100%.
And as I learned this from Janice Upshaw, a local Suzuki violin teacher in Tacoma. She's the person that I learned the month-to-month system from. And she said, you give me this rate for the month, and you are promised 4 lessons. But if there's 5 weeks in the month, then you get a 5th one for free.
Exactly.
It's kind of how she...
Exactly. And I tell parents, I don't really have anybody complain anymore, honestly. Yeah. But I used to when I didn't really have like a big studio or like kind of proof that it works. And I would always say, like, I promise if you were to do this math out, you're coming out ahead, like by a lot.
Well, in my contract, I set it up so that you could, if you wanted to, you could pay me lesson per lesson, but it's like this rate. But if you pay for the whole month up front, then you get 20% off.
Right, exactly.
So then it's, I mean, but that's really the number that I want to be at anyhow.
Exactly, right, exactly.
And I mean, it's probably happened to you more than it's happened to me, where a student just decides they're done taking lessons.
Yeah.
And now that income you were counting on is like,
yeah.
So then you've got a month to figure it out.
Yeah.
They've already paid you.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So in other words, it really is, it's about streamlining the financial systems and making it so that you're not freaking out. Because that's part of it, right? It's like, well, if I'm going to do this full time, I am not interested in spending my entire life worrying about how I'm going to pay rent or eat. Like,
yeah.
This is going to be a viable business model, or I'm not going to do it. So like, you also have to be a business person.
Yeah.
Or interested, at least in learning about.
And that's not something that they teach you in music school.
No.
Unless you went out of your way to, take an economics class here or there.
Right. But it's like a blast too. Like, there are these risks, but then also like, I answer only to me. Mm-hmm. Like, and I'm at a point now where I have, the studio between me and the violinist and the vocal coach and the cello teacher and the other piano teacher. There are enough students that if I lose a student, I don't even whatever. Like, whereas before it was like, oh God, that's literally 10% of my income or 20% of my income. Now it's
there goes Friday night pizza. Like,
yeah, right. Well, there goes just next week's dinner. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Now it's like, and I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging. I'm just grateful. Now it's like, mm-hmm. The rate at which I get new inquiries is greater than the rate at which I lose. So, and it has been for a while. And so it's less and less of a concern, but it does take, you kind of got to white knuckle it for a little while.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why so many of the best private teachers out there that are studio teachers started out as, Ms. Smith down the street.
Yeah. I was.
Yeah. I mean, you were, up the hill, but it was.
but what I meant is like, I had one or two students that I was teaching out of a church in Lakewood. Mm-hmm. It was really low key.
And I know a fistful of people that started just as, church musicians who offered lessons to some kids of a couple of parishioners, and that's how they got started.
Sure.
Because then the church music wasn't as rewarding as, the huge, private studio, or that one was, taking away from the other. And I also know people who have no desire to teach privately, and, thank God they don't.
So if you can believe it, I thought, people asked me my whole life, they were like, do you teach? Because I'd love to learn. And I'm like, I think it would be awful. And like,
conversation.
I love it so much. It is so much fun. Mm-hmm. It is so much fun to figure out how to lay. It's like I loved writing papers in college for the same reason. It's like, it's so fun to find a way to lay out a concept logically step by step and then see the point driven home at the end. Like, mm-hmm. That's kind of like the light bulb moment, when we're kids. It is so fun to do that. And not only that, but teaching has made my playing immeasurably better.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I learned so much just from like saying, and then like, but do you do that when you play? Like, oh, you should probably start incorporating that.
I hate to pull on the trope, but I learned so much about how to play from stubborn violists.
Always.
Like, how do you do that? And it's like, it's something that I've never even thought about.
Yeah.
Like, what does your thumb do when you shift from third to fifth position? I was like,
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I guess it does that.
Yeah. So, anyway, yeah, it's a blast. And the membership model lets me do, like, for example, we just started a practice group called the Sonata Society, which is cheesy, but I love it. So it's for an hour on Mondays and an hour on Thursdays. And it's sort of like study hall for music. So what I tell parents is, if you have a kid who struggles with self-motivation, or if you're tired and you don't want to motivate your kid to practice, just treat this like soccer or baseball. And they come on Monday and they come on Thursday, and that's all they have to put in for the week. Because honestly, like, this is probably just sacrilege for most music teachers, but like, if a kid puts in 2 hours a week for the first 2 or 3 years, they're gonna just, that's plenty. Most put in 10 minutes a week, like, honestly. So providing them that isolated time to just show up, practice, and leave has just been incredibly valuable. And like, because it's a membership, I don't charge. That's just a thing they get. And one of the piano teachers is always going to be there. So it's not a lesson, but one of the teachers is there to answer questions. Like, oh, what note is this? Or what does this little symbol mean? Or what does combrio mean? Like, oh, let me answer, you know?
Something that I learned by playing in community orchestras that applies more so to kids and amateur ensembles in general is that you cannot assume that anybody is practicing.
Yes, exactly.
Ever.
I finally realized that. That's exactly right. About 6 months ago.
Like, I have been in ensembles and just as an audience member watched so many rehearsals where conductors get angry at people for not being able to play their part.
Yeah.
But you have this expectation that they don't know about or that they have refused to meet that it's not happening.
Yeah.
And it's realistically, if you are paying to be in a youth orchestra or paying to be a member of the music lab, you want to play.
Yeah.
That's what you are paying to have a musical experience. And for my students in public school, you're not showing up so that, I mean, it's great when we can bring home trophies, but you're not coming to class so that we can be the best orchestra in the known universe.
Exactly.
And I see that so much with teachers who, I mean, to pull their hair out over making each student perfect, that kid has no desire to do that.
Right.
And,
who are you doing that for? Are you doing it for
that
you,
pursuit doesn't make that student want to take the next step.
Right.
What makes them want to take the next, we were talking about this earlier, is when they finally fall in love with their sound.
Yeah.
And even if that's playing, Twinkle Twinkle with their cello friend or Jingle Bells with their cello friend, if they can do it well and love the sound they make, that's like way more important than having, absolutely the best, most precise technique.
And that's why we're all doing it anyway, for heaven's sake.
Exactly. Right? And once they love it, then you can like, okay, by the way, your left wrist is just like so janky. Can we please fix it?
Let's work on that.
Once you have that investment.
Yeah.
You gotta have some investment first, and they have to play.
And like, I love to tell people this right away. Like, and I'm selective about who I tell it to, but I'm like, listen, we're doing this because it's really enriching, because it makes us better humans, and it makes living life interesting and rich. Yuzha Wang already exists. Like, like Lang Lang exists. Even if you make it to the global circuit, like, nobody cares. Honestly. Like,
truly.
Like, let's talk about why this Beethoven sonata is a masterpiece instead. Like, why this enriches your life to learn. I often tell, especially my adult students who get really wound up. The adults are worse than the kids. They get really wound up about being like really good all the time. They're always apologizing constantly. And
I love having adult students somewhat for that reason, because when you give them a task, that the mentality of I'm paying for it, I better do it,
right.
is nice, but they overstress.
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Nathan, you asked me to do 8 measures and I could only do 3.
Yeah.
I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, well, let's figure out why. That's no problem. This is information. This is helping.
I always tell them, like, I want you to think of this, unless you cherish a desire to actually be a performer, and then we'll change the conversation a little bit. But like we just said, that's basically nobody. Like, think of this as you think of like going to a yoga class once a week or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't go to yoga and then the person's like, okay, do cat cow, and then you like can't do it all the way, and then you're like, I'm so sorry, I can't do the stretch all the way. This is a disaster. I'm terrible. Like it's, I don't know why. I think it may be the horrible mean piano teacher cliche has people stressed, but
well, the reality is that the divide between being a novice and mastery is time with the instrument or time with the skill. And
yes.
so in my classes, where other orchestra teachers would stop and go note by note, person by person, making every F natural totally in tune.
Yeah.
Now, it'd be nice if my orchestra played more in tune. That'd be great. But that's 30 or 40 minutes not playing.
Yeah, right.
So really, as great as it would be to have that one note in tune, and there are times when you do need to break things down into smaller pieces, but you're always sacrificing playing time when you make that choice.
Totally.
And if the difference between being a novice and mastery is time with the instrument, the best use of your time is always playing.
Instrument, yeah.
Playing the instrument.
In that example, it's likely that over the course of spending that time with the instrument, they're going to understand how to tune the F natural. Like in months, weeks, years, but it'll probably happen.
Well, and that's something that to come back to the idea, learned through playing with community groups is, I'm not getting paid to be here. I'm choosing to be here. I'm giving up time of just, being at home relaxing or taking a private student to be here. And usually the conductor is somebody who I know and is asked, hey, we need some more violins. Can you come help out? Or just that kind of situation. And it's the worst with guest conductors that don't know the group. And it's the absolute worst, no offense, with pianists who are conductors, because the way that pianists understand articulation does not exist on any instrument that isn't piano, and also highly dependent on which piano school they come from.
Totally, and also which piano and also which hall.
What does tenuto even mean to a pianist?
Exactly.
Because literally it means hold full value. Yeah. Literally. But every pianist thinks it's some different flavor of stress.
Yeah.
And yeah, that only works on piano. So
it's true.
Like
piano is its own little island.
Can you sing the sound you want, and then I'll tell you what you mean? And I won't name names, but I got in an argument with a conductor once, and I said, "Can you sing us?" He wanted staccato in a slow movement of Beethoven.
And this is a pianist?
A pianist.
Yeah,
wanted a slow movement of Beethoven and wanted staccato.
Yeah.
And said, "Oh, that's it's like a Stravinsky staccato. We need a Beethoven staccato." It's like,
that sounds like.
Well, I mean, and that Hugh Edwards, the director of Olympia Symphony, I mean, he would come in and do a lot of workshops when I was in high school in Olympia. And he's got this whole, Beethoven is carnal warfare. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And if you listen to his symphonies, that is very much true. Less so from a pianist perspective, maybe that's a different thing.
Can you, well, I'm only raising my eyebrow because what do you mean carnal warfare? Like maybe that's a different conversation.
Well, it's battle. It's all
okay.
Conflict
for sure.
And even the joy stuff like 7 is riding a horse with a sword in the air,
Yeah. I just got done working on the Pathétique piano sonata. It's the same. The whole thing just feels like a big battle.
So I was doing my interpretation of staccato. He said, I need more staccato. So I would play shorter and off the string because that's what staccato is. And we got in a little bit of a spat, and I said, well, can you just sing what you want? And he, like, oh, so you want missa da voce, which is like the middle of the voice. This is what that means. So that's the, accent this way, diminuendo on the other side.
Yeah.
That's what you want. You want missa da voce.
Looks like a little hairpin in the piano.
Yeah. So just say that's what you want.
Yeah.
And he insisted that that's what a staccato is.
That's bizarre. I'm a pianist and I wouldn't, anyway. But it's true. It's true. Piano players are weird. Like, and it's funny. No, it's true. Like everybody has in the music world, there are these archetypes. Like everybody knows the vocalist trope. Everybody knows the viola player trope. The piano trope is real.
Well, I will give an exception to pianists that played percussion in college or high school or college. Yeah. And you are not the only one.
I know.
Then the diversity of instruments and seeing in rehearsal the way that other instruments work through things.
Yeah.
Because for the longest time, the route to conducting from piano was being a répétiteur, which is you're a good enough pianist that you can read from a full score and rehearse with opera companies.
That's hard.
Yeah. Which is really, it requires serious piano chops.
Yeah.
And so they would just let that person be the conductor in the pit.
You know, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, so that's how pianists became conductors.
That's fascinating.
Is as a répétiteur.
Sure.
So rehearsing the vocalist for operas. But that's also why their conducting technique, the people who took that route, are like, I mean, Bernstein.
It's very piano-based.
Well, not piano-based, but it's not like, 1, 2, 3. Because, strings people, kill me if you want to, but the best conductors are in the realm of wind ensemble. I mean, always, because they're thinking about producing sound at the precise moment that they want it from instruments that have so many different kinds of action.
Sure.
Great. If you're just working with strings, I mean, there's huge margin of error for when the sound can start. Yeah. But if you have piccolo, oboe, tuba, and crash cymbal, how are you going to get all of those instruments play at the same time? Right. And in that way, being precise with your gesture is like way more important.
Interesting.
There's no room for silliness.
Yeah.
But if you're working with pros, or at least adults who know what they're doing, I mean, they may or may not look at you at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Full disclosure, me and one of my stand partners, one of the orchestras I play in, who used to play in Seattle Symphony, sometimes she will write in our parts, DLU, don't look up. Oh. And it's usually on like a really kind of tricky spot where the conductor is like over trying.
Sure.
And
throw you off.
And this is not specific to any one conductor. We play with a lot of different people.
Sure.
But and I don't think she means it as an offense to the conductor. It's just like our ears are more important than our eyes.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, and not to take that conversation and make it totally about me in a truly piano fashion.
We gotta find a way to get back on track here somehow.
Yeah, right, I know.
Took a magic carpet ride somewhere else.
But just what I was thinking is that, like, the way that I would connect that entire dialogue to piano teaching is that so often pianists live in just their own isolated little worlds. Like you hear all the time, like if you read articles like, what do I have to do to become a virtuoso piano player? Like in the top 10, it's always like
every day.
Yeah, it's like always like be okay being alone, be an introvert, right? And what happens is these people have no idea like how to make music with other people, and they have no idea how much like more rich the musical world is. So I think the point you made about pianists who are percussionists is actually really smart. That's really interesting because it's true. Or just play another instrument in a large ensemble.
Or just having a variety of experiences. Like we've talked, like I used to turn pages professionally for Seattle Symphony. And one of the awesome opportunities.
That's so scary.
Well, it is. I was doing a concert it was the first time I turned pages for Hamelin. It was Hamelin and Leif, I want to say Leif Ansnes. You heard of him? He's a younger Norwegian pianist, and he's fantastic.
I think actually I get recommendations from him on YouTube. He plays Philip Glass.
Oh, he plays everything. And so they did all this 2 piano stuff. So they did the Debussy Blanc et Noir, which I didn't know that piece at all, and it totally blew my mind.
Did they do Ravel, La Valse?
No.
Ugh.
But I didn't. The JVC has a mighty fortress right in the middle of it, because that's the Germans invading. Which I was a little like, why would you take that hymn and make it about war? But anyhow, and then they did the two pianos version of Rite of Spring.
Nice, very cool.
Which was terrifying page turning.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, well, I definitely missed a couple here. Well, but the really bad thing is that on stage in Benaroya, there's so many people in there, and with the wood paneling, it heats up pretty quickly. But also since there isn't any cloth on the walls or the ceiling, the airflow is pretty there's kind of like a turbine that happens on stage.
You're just like in a hurricane trying to turn pages for Stravinsky.
No, and so I'm sure as a piano student, I always saw you and others with their music in a 3-ring binder, and I have heard Jane Hardy chew people out who didn't have their music in a binder.
Yeah.
Because the page turner, and they're working with the new Baron Rider score that somebody gifted them.
Yeah.
And they haven't bent the spine.
Yeah.
And so the pages are
Oh, sorry.
And through the whole sacrificial dance right at the end of I just stood up the whole time holding it.
Yeah. That's what I kept doing.
Some of the people in the front row have paid over $200 to hear this concert. I'm going to hold this page down.
Yes, I'm going to do it correctly. Exactly.
Jane, well, my point in bringing those two people up is in conversation with a young-ish pianist who, has done all the major orchestras. He's played with Berlin, but is still trying to earn that Long Long or Yuja Wang place in the world. Nice enough guy, but not terribly inviting. Because that's not what he does. It's not what he's paid to do. But somebody like Hamlin, who's played with everybody, he's been everywhere, and he's going to play it right. He's been playing long enough. And I'm sure he still practices. But he, took more time talking to, stage crew, and he a little more giving with the conversation. And because you're talking about is that he's not stuck in the practice room anymore. Yeah. His headspace is in the I'm a communicator, not
right, exactly. I'm conveying an artistic idea.
Not this machinist.
So Marta Argerich.
Of course.
She's the same way. I just love her so much because of her her persona in the classical world now. Her albums are always things like Marta Argerich and Friends. She's always just on stage smiling.
Because just the two of them. So much hair between them. And I didn't understand when we were in PLU how much Jane loved chamber music.
Oh yeah, that's her thing for sure.
Top-notch private teacher, but it was always about the chamber music to her. I didn't quite get it, and I love chamber music, but it's hard to put together to get people to agree to do it.
It's true.
And to follow through and actually show up at the performance. But when you watch people like Marta Argerich, Misha Maisky, other people who where that's kind of their bread and butter.
Yeah.
They're doing more of that music as a means of communication.
Yeah, and they're just smiling to each other all the time, and it just looks so lovely.
So it's not this master crafted machined.
Yeah. And it's also not all about me, which can be a very common attitude among solo musicians. So vocalists are this way, pianists can be this way, and I really try hard to break that down. When people get their head gets a little bit big, I'm Yuja Wang exists. Remember this.
Well, it's a Ferrari is beautiful and it's fast and it's high performing, but it breaks down all the time. And when it does, it's extremely expensive to fix. Honestly, give me a Volvo.
Yeah.
It's never going to break down. It's reliable.
Sure.
So, how can we apply that analogy to music is I don't want that to play at the highest level and play it perfectly is just not worth it's not worth the cost.
Yeah,
So
and
the smooth riding Volvo.
it's actually interesting because I read an article, speaking of Yuja, where she's considering retiring from the global stage because her words, she's kind of bored.
Well, I mean, she plays the same 4 piano concertos.
It's true. But can you imagine? Can you just imagine spending that many hours? Like, people talk about the 10,000 hour rule. She's probably at like 30,000. Like, imagine that. And then just like, nah, I don't know. I'm going to go like learn how to knit or something. Like, it's just amazing to me. But like, to your point, it's, I don't know. It's elusive, and you wonder, is that worth it? When there's already so many superb recordings of Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, and what do those voices have left to say?
Right, precisely, right. So that's a whole different conversation. But yes, I wonder that all the time. I'm like, classical music is so weird.
It's not a whole different conversation because it circles back to you making music for your students.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they've never met Hannon has said what he's going to say.
Yes. Probably literally millions of times.
I think we're into the trillions if we're counting with the real pianists out there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't speak to every student.
Yeah.
And I think every student needs an experience, not just that speaks to them, but that they can speak through.
Right.
So, like, me coming into this job in Port Angeles, that's like big, serious orchestra. I mean, it's like trying to drive a tractor in reverse. It's like a big, huge piece of machinery, and if you don't do it right, it you terrible analogy. There's a lot of kids, and it's an excellent program. Yeah. And there's definitely a wrong way to do it.
Sure.
Landmines everywhere.
Sure.
But the most important thing is keeping everybody engaged and keeping everybody feeling like they're making good sound.
Yeah.
So when I showed up and I look at the music on the wall, I mean, I had played at contests in high school where Port Angeles was there, and I had heard, most of the things that are on the library shelf. And so the first thing I did was, listen to everything on J.W. Pepper that's like in the last 5 years new, and that was within the realm of possibility for my kids to do. And at the first concert, we didn't play anything that had been played before.
Sure.
I mean, the chamber orchestra, I mean, they did real, some, classical repertoire. I mean, of course it's been played before. Yeah. But the freshmen and then the large symphonic orchestra, all new music.
Right.
Not just the fundamental reasoning was I didn't want to be compared to.
It was wise, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a lot of families with like multiple kids who've gone through the program, and I think mom and dad are sick of hearing the strings arrangement of Hoedown.
Yeah.
Which is like one of the best pieces for string orchestra, but when you've heard all of your 5 kids do it, like I think you're maybe ready for something new.
Yeah, it's weird. Classical music is bizarre in that regard, and I get it. So much of what we do is built on legacy and history and dynasty, but like, Yuja seems to be the person we keep coming back to, or I keep coming back to, but when she releases an album and it's like all the same stuff that Trivanov and Lisitsa, and they're just...
Of course she's bored.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Although her encores tell a different, or not, they reinforce how bored she is. That they're always, I mean, everybody knows her version of the Mozart.
The crazy one.
Yeah, the crazy one. That's like ragtime and then French and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
One of my first podcasts was with Anna Edwards, if you know her. She's a conductor in the Seattle area. She used to teach at Roosevelt High School.
Oh, cool.
But her whole shtick is including underrepresented composers, so women, people of color, and I think a lot of audiences or students are expecting, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms. But like we were talking about, I think they've said everything they have to say. But we are not trying to take them away. We're trying to add.
Right. That's
so, like Beethoven will still be there tomorrow
yes.
if we do, a Michael Clarke original today.
And his mark is completely on the Michael Clarke original in the fact that like those composers influenced everything that we think of as concert music. Like it's inevitable. So
exactly,
they're not going anywhere.
But unfortunately, Beethoven wasn't thinking about the 11-year-old who's missing a ring finger on his left hand that still wants to play piano, but Michael Clarke is, and so you can make a piece that's enjoyable for that student that accommodates their needs. I mean, we're not going to wake Beethoven from the dead to write concerto for right hand. It's not happening.
Right.
So as we come to the denouement of this conversation, what does the future hold for you? Where do you think the Music Lab is going? Will it expand to more teachers?
So I'm at a moment, I should say, because now it's more than just me, but it's kind of like a let's see. Like, I don't want to say make or break because I feel very positive, but we're kind of at a bursting point where a lot of things are happening, and I'm trying to, especially now with COVID going on, like, good Lord, that just complicates everything. But there's a lot of programs that I've just started brand new. There are a lot of students coming in who are not piano students. So I got 2 vocal inquiries today. I got a couple violin students who are interested. I just met a new student from Gig Harbor before you and I got on this call. And so I am very busy. But it's a very good thing. I am so happy about it.
I am so surprised and enamored with the fact that private studios have kind of been like Teflon to the situation.
Dude, right. I know.
I mean, it's an inconvenience and it's not the same, but the way I was just doing an interview with Bradley Hawkins, if you know who, he's a cello teacher up at SPU, and he every weekday at 9 a.m. does a Zoom cello class for anybody who wants to join from anywhere.
Exactly.
And is reaching way more people and potentially attracting more students.
So for me, like, exactly, like, I don't want to at all say coronavirus has been like a blessing, but it has definitely caused me to think of new ideas and to innovate in a very beneficial way for this studio. Like, I will never not use Zoom now in what I'm doing, like, for that exact reason. Like, we do these monthly classes on Saturdays at the end of the month. It takes place at your regular lesson, and I'm going to do them via Zoom now because to give parents the, like, oh, I don't have to drive them on a Saturday morning somewhere. So like this Saturday, or not, this month, we're going to do kind of a workshop, an intensive on French Impressionism in music. And they're going to have these little groups that they're going to go into the little Zoom breakout rooms.
Yep.
And it's going to just be phenomenal. Like, and I never would have even ever dabbled in Zoom if not for COVID. So I'm not grateful for COVID, but that's been a plus.
Well, necessity is the engine of ingenuity.
Yeah, no, it's true, right?
And as I have, worked with some of my colleagues to get them online with learning, is there are people who resist change, and there are people who willingly adapt.
Yeah, you are so speaking my language.
So when I was already using Google Classroom to do, because I have had the experience of being in Tacoma Youth Symphony way back in the day where your CPAs were like, you stood up in front of the other 150 people and played your playing test in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And that works for a very specific kind of student that I maybe don't have in the public school setting.
Yeah.
So just doing playing test as a video recording, and you do it at home in the comfort of your own home, and you have as many takes as you want, as many tries to get it right. Send me your best.
Yeah.
So I was already doing that. Like, pretty much the only thing we're missing is, rehearsal, which is huge, but more or less the regular everyday classwork that I grade is the same.
You had an infrastructure.
I changed basically nothing.
Yeah.
I just started making this podcast.
Yeah.
That's
music has been very resilient in this.
Well,
from my perspective,
because we are used to fighting to survive. Yeah. We are more willing to adapt. But where I see less success is people who are trying to do the same thing that they always did through the digital medium.
Yeah.
Even in music, a virtual performance is cool, but it doesn't even emulate a rehearsal experience.
No, yeah, it's novel, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You can't really hear it.
Exactly. Well, the kids don't hear each other until the performance, and realistically, you have muted a ton of what's being played.
Yeah. And
the video may or may not be the same recording as the audio recording.
It's true.
Because it's kind of easy to just shove the video in there. The audio is really the trickier part, and so you usually record the audio ahead of time.
There are some YouTube piano videos, and I'm like,
have you seen
what you're playing, really?
The one that blows my mind is Augustin Hadlich. He plays piano and violin.
Yeah, I've seen him doing those duets.
There's a couple where he's not wearing any headphones. And I'm like, does he have perfect click or something? How?
Yeah. So, he did the one with the Rachmaninoff Vocalise. That's
the one I'm thinking of in particular.
Pretty, yeah.
It had so much rubato.
Yeah, right. How did you do that without exactly?
Are you just wearing crazy earbuds on only one side? Or is he just a god?
He actually seems like a nice guy.
Yeah. Please tell the story that I know you're about to tell.
Oh, I was just gonna say I randomly was farming with his parents, and I didn't know that until they told me, oh, our son Augustine is the second violinist in the world, and there's just these German immigrant farmers in the middle of Italy.
Yeah.
And their son was Augustin Hadlich, and let's see, I don't want to be too rough, but they were rough.
They were not as kind as he is.
they were rough people. And anyway, so I was surprised by his demeanor on YouTube. I was like, wow, he grew up there and was raised by that woman and is nice.
Well, we were at some point trying to wrap up this conversation, but now something really important has come to mind. Talk to me about the importance of global travel in terms of being a whole person.
Oh gosh, that's so interesting. Well, there's the kind of cliche answer of seeing how other people live. But I suppose it's cliche for a reason.
I mean, I guess the people who are watching should know that the first time I went to Europe, we were roommates.
Right. And I keep that's right, with David Kwame.
Yes, and with David Kwame. He's a doctor now.
Really?
Yeah, he's a full-blown MD.
Is he stressed out of his mind? That's awesome.
I don't know. I haven't checked in with him.
I keep forgetting that the audience is students. So hence I see. Okay.
Anyhow, even so much as our communal experience of every time you get water, it's fizzy. Or trying to buy food in Munich that wouldn't bankrupt you.
Yeah. Oh, it's impossible.
And then were you part of that group that went to the Renaissance Fair in Augsburg?
No, was Jackie and Faith there though?
Yes, and Shirley.
Oh, Shirley.
And we had asked for our change, so that because that's something like around in America, like you get your change, then you leave a tip.
Yeah.
And she just assumed like whatever was extra that we had given her was the, and so it's like, oh, can I have my change back? And she slams it down on the table and says, in Germany, we leave a tip.
Yeah. Oh, whoa. Oh my God.
Like I was going to tip. I was going to tip you more than like 10 euro cent. Like I was,
give me a second.
I just want my like Euro dime back.
Right. Ursula.
Might need that.
That's funny.
Well, so I have watched via social media that you have traveled not like immensely, but that's something that's important to you. Why is that so important to you?
Well, I think this may be way deeper than you were looking for, but I think it is a common thing in the world nowadays for people to get sort of disenchanted by living. And by that, I mean the constant influx of negative news or what your friends are doing on social media or what random people who you think matter on Instagram are doing. All of that lends itself to a sense of just being kind of like womp womp about like everything.
Uh-huh.
And I think that traveling is just an incredible way to reintroduce adventure into your life.
Well, and it gives you that kind of survival mode that, but like in like a totally healthy and kind of safe way. I mean, at least like traveling Western Europe.
Yeah, there are some
like,
stakes.
If you miss a train,
yeah,
you're gonna have to figure out how to communicate with somebody and our lives here in America don't present us with safe survival experiences unless we create them for ourselves.
Yeah, we as a species have become excellent at what our evolutionary design was, which is to like survive our environment. Like congratulations, we've done that very well actually in the West. And now
so when there's not a real threat, it's really damaging to our health.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I don't know, I highly recommend the documentary Paper Tigers if you haven't seen it.
I haven't.
So it's about this alternative school in Walla Walla, of all places, and talking about the health statistics of like being in stressful or traumatic situations.
Sure.
And the phrase "paper tigers" comes from that your adrenaline system, your fight or flight, is turned on, but there's no real threat.
Yeah.
And just working in an office and like, is Gary going to come ask me for the business reports? Is he going to come by today? I mean, when my phone rings, I have this like, oh God.
Somebody needs me or I'm in trouble or
because nobody calls me anymore. It's like, oh gosh, did I miss a bill? Like, what is this?
Well, our brains sort of like redefine what is and is not a threat according to time spent in an environment.
And we are not equipped to overcome that threat, and we don't get the relief or the joy of surviving it in the way that like when we were the first night in Paris with the orchestra, remember there was that whole group of choir people that didn't make the last train to our hotel.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if you were in that group with Faith and Jackie, but
on there.
No, you were in that group. And we just kind of like, we figured out the train that went the furthest north.
Yeah.
And based on the information we had available, we made it work.
Exactly right. It's and that's just like so much fun, honestly, because you're right. Like, really, it's not a disaster, but it feels like a little bit more of a high stakes scenario. And it's just an adventure. It's saying you're with your friends.
Well, I mean, and being in, and this was back in 2011. I mean, Paris is still like relatively safe for a group of people.
Totally.
Walking around.
Totally.
I mean, we weren't going to die out there.
No.
And there were moments where I was nervous, but when we got back to the hotel, it was like, now we have this awesome story.
Totally. I was
But like the phone call that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
Like if you there's no joy or
there's no reward. Yeah.
There's no reward.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. The same thing happened when I was in Italy with a bunch of people, and we were trying to get off the train in Bologna, and like these 4 girls had fallen asleep, and like in Italy, they give you like 4 seconds to get off the train, and then like if you're not paying attention,
we have to go now. We have no wait for you.
like you're on your way to like Mercury if you have not gotten off. So anyway, so they got separated from us, and this is before ubiquitous Wi-Fi, and we couldn't get a hold of them, and so we all split up. Those of us that did get off in Bologna, we all split up and like went to the different train stations to try and intercept them on the way back, and it was a blast. But they were like crying; they were in hysterics.
So as we like actually wrap up this conversation, 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, what would it take for you to walk away from the music lab and it keeps going?
What would it take for me to walk away and it keeps going?
Yeah.
Like, how do I get it to be self-managing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So it would take, so I've got, I mean, if I get very specific, I've got a financial number in my head that I want to be generating.
Because it kind of seems like maybe this is where you're headed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think I figured it out.
Yeah. So I've got a number that I want to reach for like a year or more. And then my goal is to just hire a manager, honestly, and pay them a salary, not an hourly thing. And then I have sort of like a base income off of the music lab, and then I get to spend all my time either playing the piano or pursuing film score, because like I'm at this weird point in my life where I'm like, I've got like a foot in like all these different places, but like really what I need to be focusing mostly on is the music lab, because it's like how I eat. So I don't have the time I want to devote to composition and figuring out Cubase and playing the really insane rep for the piano. And so I think probably within 5 years it'd be self-sufficient. We'll see.
And my last question that I ask of all my guests is, if you could go back to a point in your life, music related or not, where you were really struggling, and give yourself advice to either help you make different choices or survive the situation, what might that be?
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, it's not music related. That's a good question. I mean, it's so cliche, but like, and I'm not even going to use this. I'm not going to use the expression "it gets better," because it's not even about being gay or anything. But like, truly, this will pass. Like these things will pass. Like anything, like good things, bad things, everything is temporary. Good things and bad things, and just accept that and just get through this. You know, I think a lot, like, I think when people have struggles, major struggles in their lives, they have, or at least I do, they have a tendency to, or they have an impulse to suffer twice. So they suffer, and they suffer because they're suffering. And it, like,
yes,
50 or 60% of the agony you experience is agony over being in agony. Like, it's so silly. And I wish I could go back and say, like, get out of your own head and just get through this.
Something that a good friend of mine who is an organist always says to me when like a performance is going poorly or there's some impending disaster is, we will survive this and worse.
Right. All you need is beta blockers. No, I'm kidding. I've never actually even taken those, but
really, yeah. I've been on beta blockers since 2010.
I know that's a thing for performance.
I notice a difference when I don't take them.
For performing?
Absolutely.
Interesting. What was I gonna say? Oh, one more thing. Just don't take yourself so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't, like, ego is trash, honestly. Like, the reason why people get so flippin' scared of performing is because they're super worried about what others think about them. And, like, that's, like, a lesson that you can only really learn either with time or, like, extreme trial. So, to anybody who's hearing that, they're probably like, yeah, sure, whatever. But, like, it's true. Like, don't take yourself so seriously.
And realistically, you're the only one who remembers.
Right, right, right. And it's not like people out in the audience are just like, mess up, mess up, mess up. Like, nobody, you know. So, anyway, assume good intent, let go, all that stuff.
Well, if one more question, and it's I'll put some links in the description. But if people want to find out more about you and the Music Lab, where can I send them?
So it is musiclabtacoma, all one word, .com. And there's like bios and pictures and recordings and all sorts of fun stuff.
That's awesome. So that pretty much brings this to a close. I've got like one or two more questions off camera, but thank you so much for, devoting this amount of time to sit here and talk with me. It's like we covered at least 4 more bases than I even anticipated.
Dude, yeah, it was fun. Thank you. I'm flattered.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.